What happens when a joke meant to get a laugh becomes the reason your husband hands you divorce papers? How could one careless insult at a family dinner tear a marriage apart, leaving you holding the blame while he quietly gathers proof? Can honesty fix what cruelty broke, or does it only speed up the ending? The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the white tablecloth at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd gathered to celebrate my sister-in-law's 40th birthday. I adjusted my black dress and smiled at the familiar faces around the long table. Graham's mother Miriam, his brother David with his wife Patricia, my younger sister Jules, and several close family friends. The wine had been flowing freely, and I felt that familiar buzz of wanting to be the center of attention. Graham sat beside me in his usual quiet way, methodically cutting his chicken masala while listening to his brother discuss some architectural project. My husband had always been reserved, almost maddeningly so. At 35, he carried himself with the careful precision of someone who measured twice and cut once in every aspect of life. Tonight, dressed in his navy blazer and crisp white shirt, he looked handsome but distant, like he was present in body but somewhere else entirely in mind. I caught Shane Marwick's eye from across the table. Shane worked with me at Hartwell Insurance, and we'd been flirting more and more lately during our coffee breaks and late-night claim reviews. He was everything Graham wasn't: spontaneous, charming, quick with compliments and jokes. Shane winked at me over his wine glass, and I felt a thrill of validation. "So, Graham," I said loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "when are you going to give Etta a little brother or sister?" My husband looked up from his plate, his brown eyes meeting mine with that familiar guarded expression. "We haven't really discussed expanding our family recently, Odessa." The conversation around us quieted slightly. Jules giggled nervously, already sensing where this might go. She knew my tendency to push boundaries when I'd been drinking. "Well, maybe that's because some people are just too tiny to be fathers of more than one child," I said with a laugh, reaching over to pat Graham's hand in what I told myself was a playful gesture. "I mean, not everyone can handle the responsibility of a big family, right, Shane?" The silence that followed was deafening. Shane's face went red, and he suddenly became very interested in his pasta. Patricia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Miriam's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she realized what I was implying. "Odessa," Graham said quietly, his voice steady but something dangerous flickering in his eyes. "What exactly do you mean by that?" I felt the wine making me bold, reckless. Part of me wanted to hurt him for being so emotionally unavailable, for making me feel invisible in my own marriage. "Oh, come on, honey. We all know you're not exactly the most assertive person. Some women need a man who can really take charge, you know." Jules kicked me under the table, but I was on a roll now. The attention felt intoxicating. "I mean, look at Shane here," I continued, gesturing toward my coworker, who was now staring at his plate like he wanted to disappear. "He's got 3 kids and another on the way. That's what I call a real man who knows how to satisfy his wife's needs." The words hung in the air like poison. Graham's face had gone completely white, but his expression remained eerily calm. He carefully placed his napkin on the table and stood up. "Excuse me," he said in that same quiet voice. "I need to use the restroom." But instead of heading toward the back of the restaurant, he walked directly to our server and pulled out his wallet. I watched in growing unease as he settled our entire table's bill, his movements precise and controlled. When he returned, he didn't sit down. "I've taken care of dinner. I'm going home to relieve the babysitter. Odessa, you can find your own way back." "Graham, wait," I started, suddenly realizing I might have gone too far. But he was already walking away, his back straight and his stride purposeful. I looked around the table at the shocked faces staring back at me. Miriam's eyes were filled with disgust and disappointment. Even Jules looked uncomfortable now. "That was harsh, Des," she whispered. Shane cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should probably head home too. Early morning tomorrow." As people began making excuses to leave, I sat there feeling the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a cold blanket. But instead of regret, I felt a surge of anger. Why was everyone acting like I was the villain? All I'd done was speak the truth about my marriage. Graham was boring, predictable, emotionally unavailable. If he couldn't handle a little honesty, that was his problem. I pulled out my phone to call an Uber, my hands shaking slightly. The rational part of my brain knew I'd crossed a line, but my pride wouldn't let me admit it. Graham would get over it. He always did. He was too passive to make a real stand about anything. But as I sat alone at that table, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a celebration, I had the strangest feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The look in Graham's eyes when he'd stood up, it wasn't hurt or anger. It was something far more dangerous. It was resolve. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and the sinking realization that Graham wasn't in bed beside me. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed for work, making coffee, with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Our 7-year-old daughter Etta sat at the breakfast bar, eating cereal and chattering about her upcoming school play. "Morning," I said tentatively, wrapping my silk robe tighter around me. Graham didn't look up from his coffee preparation. "Good morning, Odessa." His tone was perfectly polite, perfectly cold. It sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Daddy, are you and Mommy fighting?" Etta asked, her big brown eyes, so much like Graham's, looking between us with the intuitive worry that children possess. "No, sweetheart," Graham said, finally turning to smile at our daughter. "Mommy and Daddy just had a disagreement last night. Sometimes grown-ups don't agree on things. Like when you and Mommy disagree about my bedtime. Something like that." He kissed the top of her head. "Finish your cereal. Grandma Miriam is picking you up for school today." I frowned. "Why is your mother?" "Because I asked her to," Graham interrupted, still not looking at me. "I have an early meeting, and you mentioned last week that you had that important claim review first thing this morning." He was right. I did have the Morrison fire claim to review with Shane, but the fact that he'd remembered when I'd barely mentioned it felt somehow ominous. Graham noticed everything, filed it all away in that architect's brain of his. After he left with nothing more than a brief goodbye to Etta, I tried to shake off the unease. Graham would cool down. He always did. In 12 years of marriage, we'd had our fights, but he'd never been one to hold grudges. He was too practical for that. At the office, I threw myself into work, trying to push thoughts of the previous night away. But when Shane knocked on my cubicle wall around 10 o'clock, I felt a flutter of anticipation. "Hey, stranger," he said with that easy smile that always made me feel attractive and wanted. "Rough night?" "You could say that." I gestured for him to sit in the chair beside my desk. Graham's being dramatic about the whole thing. Shane's expression grew uncomfortable. "Des, maybe we should talk about what happened." "What's to talk about?" I interrupted. "I made a joke. Graham can't handle the truth about our marriage. End of story." "But the way you brought me into it..." Shane ran a hand through his dark hair. "My wife was there, Odessa. She's been asking questions all morning." A spike of irritation shot through me. "What kind of questions?" "About us. About whether there's something going on." "And what did you tell her?" Shane was quiet for a long moment, studying his hands. "I told her we're just coworkers, that you were drunk and didn't mean anything by it." The dismissal stung more than I expected. "Right, just coworkers." "Come on, Des. You know it's more complicated than that." Did I? For months, Shane and I had been dancing around something, staying late to work on cases together, grabbing drinks after particularly stressful days, sharing increasingly personal details about our marriages. He'd complained about his wife's lack of ambition, her obsession with the kids. I'd vented about Graham's emotional distance, his inability to make me feel desired. But now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of Monday morning, Shane looked like a man trying to back away from a cliff edge. "Look," I said, moving my chair closer to his. "What I said last night came from a place of frustration. Graham and I..." We haven't been connecting lately. I feel invisible in my own marriage. Shane's expression softened. I get that. I really do. But maybe there are better ways to handle it than public humiliation. Since when do you care about Graham's feelings? Since my marriage is on the line too. He stood up abruptly. I should get back to the Patterson case. We'll talk later, okay? But as the day wore on, Shane seemed to find excuses to avoid me. When I suggested grabbing lunch together, he claimed he'd already eaten. When I stopped by his desk around 4, he was on a call that seemed to stretch indefinitely. By the time I got home that evening, my frustration had reached a boiling point. Graham was in his study, door closed, the soft clicking of his keyboard audible through the wood. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk," I announced. Graham looked up from his laptop, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "About what?" "About last night. About this cold shoulder treatment you're giving me." He saved whatever he was working on and closed the laptop with deliberate care. "I'm not giving you any treatment, Odessa. I'm simply processing what happened." "Processing?" I laughed, but it sounded harsh even to my own ears. "It was a joke, Graham. Maybe not the best-timed joke, but you're acting like I committed some unforgivable sin." "You publicly humiliated me in front of our family and friends," he said calmly. "You implied that I'm inadequate as a husband and that you're having an affair with Shane Marwick." "I never said I was having an affair." "You didn't have to say it explicitly. The implication was clear to everyone at that table." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Maybe if you paid more attention to your wife, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for validation." Something flickered in Graham's eyes, hurt maybe, or disappointment, but his voice remained steady. "Is that what this is about? Validation? When's the last time you told me I was beautiful, Graham? When's the last time you initiated sex, or planned a romantic evening, or made me feel like anything more than a roommate you happened to share a mortgage with?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was seeing me for the first time. "When's the last time you did any of those things for me?" The question caught me off guard. "That's different." "Is it?" I felt the conversation slipping away from me, taking a turn I hadn't expected. This was supposed to be about Graham apologizing for overreacting, about us moving past his hurt feelings and getting back to normal. "Look," I said, softening my tone, "maybe we both could do better, but that doesn't change the fact that you're being childish about this whole thing." Graham stood up slowly, and I was struck again by how tall he was, how solid. In the early days of our marriage, his quiet strength had made me feel safe. Now it just felt like a wall between us. "I'm going to pick up Etta from my mother's," he said. "We'll be back around 8. "Graham," but he was already walking past me, leaving me alone in his study, surrounded by the precise organization that defined everything about my husband. His drafting table was covered with blueprints for some commercial project. His bookshelf held architectural journals arranged by date. Even his desk was immaculate. Laptop closed, papers stacked neatly, pens in their designated holder. It was only as I turned to leave that I noticed something different. His computer desk, usually clear except for his laptop and a small framed photo of Etta, now held a neat stack of manila folders. I couldn't see the labels from where I stood, but something about their presence felt significant. My phone buzzed with a text from Jules. "Called to check on you. How's Graham handling everything?" I typed back quickly, "He's being dramatic. It'll blow over." But even as I sent the message, I found myself staring at those folders, wondering what my methodical husband was organizing so carefully, and why that made me feel so uneasy. 2 weeks later, I convinced myself that things were getting back to normal. Graham had maintained his polite distance, but he was still sleeping in our bed, still handling his share of household responsibilities, still being a devoted father to Etta. I told myself his silence was just his way of processing, and eventually he'd let it go. The opportunity to prove everything was fine came with Etta's school spring festival. It was one of those community events where all the parents gathered to watch their kids perform and pretend to enjoy overpriced hot dogs and watery lemonade. Graham had initially said he might be too busy with a project deadline, but I'd insisted we go together as a family. It's important for Etta to see us united, I'd argued, and he'd agreed with that same calm politeness that had become his default mode. The festival was held on the school's playground, with a small stage set up for the children's performances. Etta was part of the second-grade choir, and she'd been practicing her songs for weeks. I wore my favorite sundress, the blue one that always got compliments, and made sure to do my hair and makeup carefully. I wanted to look good, to remind everyone that despite whatever gossip might be circulating from that dinner, I was still happily married. Graham arrived separately, coming straight from a client meeting. I spotted him across the crowd, talking to another father about some construction project. Even in his work clothes, khakis and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, he looked handsome and competent. Several of the other mothers glanced his way appreciatively, and I felt a familiar surge of possessive pride. But when he joined Etta and me at our blanket on the grass, his greeting was cordial but distant. "Sorry I'm late. How long until the performance?" 20 minutes, I said, patting the space beside me. "I saved you a spot." He sat down, but not close enough for our shoulders to touch. The distance felt deliberate, calculated. That's when I noticed Shane and his wife Melissa approaching with their 3 kids in tow. My stomach tightened as I remembered Shane's increasing avoidance at work over the past 2 weeks. He'd been professional but cool, finding excuses to cut our conversations short and declining invitations for after-work drinks. "Graham, Odessa!" Melissa called out with a brightness that seemed forced. "Mind if we join you?" "Of course not," Graham replied, though I noticed he didn't echo the invitation. As they settled their blanket nearby, I caught Shane avoiding eye contact with me. His wife, a petite blonde with the kind of wholesome prettiness that came from yoga classes and organic smoothies, kept glancing between Shane and me with barely concealed suspicion. The tension was suffocating. I felt like everyone was watching us, waiting for something to happen. The rational part of my brain warned me to keep quiet, to just get through the event without incident. But the wine I'd had with lunch, combined with my frustration over Shane's cold shoulder and Graham's continued distance, made me reckless. When the conversation lulled, I decided to break the ice with humor. "You know," I said loudly enough for the nearby families to hear, "it's funny how different men handle stress. Some rise to the occasion while others just shrink away from challenges." Graham's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't respond. Melissa frowned. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that some men are natural leaders, you know. They take charge when things get tough." I glanced meaningfully at Shane, who was now staring at his hands, while others prefer to just keep their heads down and avoid conflict. "Odessa," Graham said quietly, "the children are about to perform." But I was on a roll now, fueled by wine and the attention of the other parents who were starting to listen. I mean, look at Shane here. 3 kids, another on the way, successful career. That's what I call a man who knows how to handle his responsibilities. Shane's face went red. "Des, maybe we should—" "What? I'm just giving credit where credit's due." I turned to smile at Graham, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Not everyone can be the ambitious type, right, honey? Some people are perfectly content with smaller achievements." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the stares of the other parents, the uncomfortable shifting of bodies on blankets. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their chatter dying down. Melissa's eyes were wide with shock and understanding. She looked at her husband, then at me, then at Graham, the pieces clearly falling into place. "Shane," she said in a voice that could cut glass, "we should move closer to the stage. The kids need a better view." "Melissa, wait," Shane started, but his wife was already gathering their things with sharp, angry movements. "Now, Shane." As they packed up their blanket, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. The look Melissa shot me was pure fury, and Shane wouldn't meet my eyes at all. Other parents were whispering now, their voices low but their glances pointed. Graham stood up slowly. "Etta, sweetheart, come here." Our daughter, who'd been playing with some friends nearby, ran over with a bright smile. "Is it time for my song, Daddy?" "Yes, baby. Let's go find a better spot to watch." He picked her up easily, settling her on his shoulders. "Mummy will catch up with us." "Aren't we staying together?" Etta asked, looking confused. "Mummy needs a few minutes," Graham said, his voice gentle with her, but his eyes cold when they met mine. "We'll be right by the stage." As they walked away, I was left sitting alone on our blanket, surrounded by the debris of my own making. The other parents were still whispering, some shooting disapproving looks my way. I felt exposed, ridiculous, like a child who'd thrown a tantrum and was now facing the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Jules. "Mum called. She heard about what happened at Romano's. She wants to talk to you." Great. Now my family was getting involved too. I watched Graham from across the playground as Etta's choir took the stage. He was applauding enthusiastically, taking photos with his phone, being the perfect supportive father. But even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided looking in my direction. When the performance ended and families began to disperse, I gathered our things and approached them. Etta was chattering excitedly about her solo, her face flushed with pride and excitement. "Did you see me, Mommy? Did you see my solo?" "You were wonderful, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Absolutely perfect." Graham was packing up his camera equipment with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. "I'll drop Etta at my mother's for the evening," he said without looking at me. "She's expecting us for dinner." "What about me? What about you?" The question hung in the air between us. I realized he wasn't including me in the dinner plans, wasn't even asking if I wanted to come along. "Graham, we need to talk about what happened." "Do we?" He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch. It wasn't anger or hurt anymore. It was something far worse. Indifference. "I think you've said quite enough for one day." He took Etta's hand and began walking toward the parking lot, leaving me standing there among the scattered festival debris, feeling more alone than I had in years. That night I sat in our empty house, replaying the day's events and trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I'd only been trying to lighten the mood, to show everyone that I wasn't ashamed of speaking my mind. Instead, I'd managed to alienate Shane completely and push Graham even further away. But it was his reaction that bothered me most. The old Graham would have been hurt, maybe angry. He would have wanted to talk it out, to understand why I was acting this way. This new Graham, calm, distant, methodical, was like a stranger wearing my husband's face. I was still awake when I heard his car in the driveway around 10 o'clock. He came in quietly, probably assuming I'd be asleep. I listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the soft click of his study door closing. Curious, I crept downstairs and saw light seeping from under his door. What was he doing in there so late? I pressed my ear to the wood and heard the soft clicking of his keyboard, occasionally interrupted by the rustle of papers. When I finally went to bed around midnight, he still hadn't come upstairs. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling and trying to shake the growing certainty that something fundamental had changed. Graham wasn't just processing anymore. He was planning something, and I had no idea what. The following Monday brought a new level of uncomfortable reality. At work, Shane barely acknowledged my existence beyond professional necessities. When I tried to approach his desk, he'd suddenly remember urgent calls to make or files to retrieve from the basement storage. The few times I managed to corner him, he'd deflect with talk about workload and deadlines. "Shane, we need to clear the air about what happened at the festival," I said, catching him by the coffee machine during the afternoon lull. He glanced around nervously, checking to see who might be listening. "There's nothing to clear, Odessa. You made your position obvious to everyone, including my wife." "I was just trying to lighten the mood," By humiliating your husband and implicating me in whatever fantasy you've cooked up about our relationship. His voice was low but sharp. Melissa has barely spoken to me since Saturday. She's asking questions I can't answer because I don't even know what game you're playing. The accusation stung. It's not a game. I thought we had something. We had coffee breaks and work conversations. That's it. He poured his coffee quickly, avoiding eye contact. Look, I like you, Des. You're smart and funny, and yeah, maybe I enjoyed the attention, but I'm not about to blow up my marriage for some office flirtation that got out of hand. So that's it. You're just going to pretend nothing happened between us? Shane finally looked at me directly, and I saw something like pity in his expression. Nothing did happen between us. That's the point you seem to be missing. He walked away, leaving me standing alone by the coffee machine, feeling foolish and exposed. Had I really misread the situation so completely? The late-night work sessions, the personal conversations, the way he'd look at me during meetings, had it all been in my head? That evening, I came home to find Graham's mother's car in our driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Miriam helping Etta with homework at the breakfast bar while Graham prepared dinner. The scene looked so domestic, so normal, that for a moment, I felt like an outsider, looking in on someone else's family. Grandma's teaching me fractions, Etta announced when I walked in. She says they're like pieces of a pie. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, setting down my purse and keys. I nodded at Miriam, who returned the gesture with cool politeness. I didn't know you were coming for dinner. Graham asked me to pick up Etta from school and stay for a while, Miriam replied, her tone carefully neutral. He said he had some things to take care of this evening. I looked at my husband, who was methodically chopping vegetables for what looked like stir-fry. What things? Just some paperwork, he said without looking up. Nothing urgent. But something in his tone suggested otherwise. After dinner, when Miriam had gone home, and Etta was settled in front of the television with her favorite movie, Graham disappeared into his study again. The pattern was becoming familiar. Polite distance during family time, then hours locked away with his laptop and those mysterious folders. My curiosity finally got the better of me. Around 10 o'clock, I made my way downstairs under the pretense of getting a glass of water. Graham's study door was closed, but I could see light underneath and hear the familiar sounds of typing and paper rustling. I tried the handle gently, locked. When had he started locking his study? I stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of my husband working on something that apparently required complete privacy. The exclusion stung more than I wanted to admit. In 12 years of marriage, Graham had never hidden his work from me. His projects, his client meetings, his professional concerns, he'd always been willing to discuss them if I showed interest. The next morning, I waited until Graham left for work and Etta was settled with her cartoons before investigating further. His study door was still locked, but I knew he kept a spare key in the kitchen junk drawer for emergencies. My hands shook slightly as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked normal at first glance. His drafting table, with its current project blueprints, his bookshelf, with its neat rows of professional journals, his desk with its careful organization. But then I noticed the filing cabinet in the corner, usually locked but now standing slightly open. Inside, I found folders labeled with things that made my blood run cold. Financial statements, personal, Etta, school records, insurance policies, and most ominously, legal consultation, family law. My hands trembled as I pulled out the legal folder. Inside were printouts from law firm websites, articles about divorce proceedings in our state, and a business card for someone named Jennifer Walsh at Walsh & Associates Family Law. At the bottom of the folder was a yellow legal pad covered in Graham's precise handwriting. I recognized his note-taking style from years of watching him work on architectural projects. Bullet points, dates, cross-references. But instead of building specifications and zoning requirements, this list contained details about our marriage that read like evidence in a court case. March 15th, Public humiliation at Romano's restaurant. Witnesses present, including family members and friends. March 29th. Repeated inappropriate comments at Etta's school event, witnessed by other parents and school staff. Financial concerns, joint checking account, mortgage, Etta's college fund, retirement accounts. Custody considerations, primary residence, school district, Etta's emotional well-being. The clinical precision of it all made me feel sick. This wasn't the emotional response of a hurt husband. This was documentation, evidence gathering, preparation for something I didn't want to acknowledge. I heard a car door slam outside and quickly shoved everything back into the folder, my heart pounding. But when I peeked out the window, it was just our neighbor getting home from work. Graham wouldn't be back for hours. Still, I locked the study door and returned the key to its hiding place, my mind racing. How long had he been planning this? How long had he been documenting our problems like a scientist studying specimens? That afternoon, I called Jules from my office, needing to talk to someone who would understand my perspective. He's keeping files on me, Jules, like I'm some kind of criminal he's building a case against. Maybe he's just trying to make sense of what's happening, Jules suggested, though she sounded uncertain. You did kind of blindside him with that stuff at dinner. It was a joke that got out of hand. I never meant to hurt him. But you did hurt him, Des. And then you doubled down at Etta's school thing. Maybe he's just protecting himself. Protecting himself from what? I'm his wife, not his enemy. Jules was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about that? The question hit me like a slap. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been trying to hurt him for weeks. The comments about Shane, the public humiliation, the way you talk about him like he's some kind of failure. Maybe he's finally decided to stop taking it. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. Even my own sister was taking Graham's side now. But as the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about what she'd said. Had I really been trying to hurt him? Or had I just been so focused on my own feelings of neglect and frustration that I'd lost sight of his? That evening, I tried a different approach. When Graham emerged from his study around 9 o'clock, I was waiting in the living room with 2 glasses of wine and what I hoped was a conciliatory expression. I thought maybe we could talk, I said, offering him one of the glasses. He looked at the wine, then at me, his expression unreadable. About what? About us. About what's been happening lately. I patted the couch cushion beside me. I know I've said some things that hurt you, and I want to make it right. Graham remained standing, but he didn't immediately refuse the conversation. What exactly do you want to make right, Odessa? Everything. The dinner, the school thing, the way I've been treating you. I know I've been unfair. Unfair. He repeated the word like he was testing its weight. Is that what you call it? I call it a mistake, a series of mistakes that I want to fix. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in his expression. But then, he set the wine glass down on the coffee table, untouched. I appreciate the gesture, he said carefully. But I think we're past the point where apologies can fix this. What do you mean? Graham looked at me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing something I didn't want him to see. I mean that some things, once broken, can't be put back together the same way. They require a different approach entirely. He turned and headed back toward his study, leaving me alone with 2 glasses of wine and the growing certainty that my husband was already several steps ahead of me in a game I was only beginning to understand. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning while I was getting ready for work. I heard the doorbell ring and found a professional-looking courier on our front step, holding a manila envelope with my name printed in block letters across the front. Odessa Morel? Yes, that's me. I need you to sign for this, please. My hands shook as I signed the electronic pad, though I couldn't say why. The courier handed me the envelope and left without another word. I stood in our foyer, staring at my name on the envelope, knowing instinctively that whatever was inside would change everything. Graham emerged from the kitchen, fully dressed for work, his travel mug in hand. He looked at the envelope in my hands, and I saw something flicker across his face, not surprise, but acknowledgement. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "I believe that's something you'll need to review carefully," he said in that same calm, professional tone he'd been using for weeks. "I'd recommend reading it thoroughly and considering your options." "Graham, what did you do?" But he was already heading for the door. "I'll be picking up Etta from school today. We'll be staying at my mother's for the rest of the week." "You can't just take our daughter." "I'm not taking her anywhere she doesn't want to go. I asked Etta if she'd like to spend some time with Grandma Miriam, and she said yes. It seemed like a good idea to give you some space to process things." The careful way he phrased everything, the legal precision of his language, made my blood run cold. This wasn't the Graham I'd married, the quiet, accommodating man who avoided conflict and let me take the lead in most decisions. This was someone else entirely, someone who planned and calculated and stayed 3 steps ahead. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letterhead at the top of the first document read, "Walsh and Associates Family Law," in elegant script. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words swam in front of my eyes as I tried to process what I was reading. Graham was filing for divorce, not just threatening it, not just considering it. He'd already set the legal process in motion. I flipped through the pages, my lawyer husband's methodical approach evident in every carefully worded paragraph. He was seeking primary custody of Etta, citing concerns about the stability of the home environment. He wanted to maintain the family home for the child's continuity and emotional well-being. He was requesting a division of assets that seemed fair on the surface, but would leave me in a significantly weaker financial position. But it was the attached documentation that really made my stomach drop. Page after page of evidence, organized with the same precision Graham brought to his architectural projects. Screenshots of text messages between Shane and me that I'd forgotten existed. Nothing explicitly romantic, but flirtatious enough to support his narrative. Photos from the school festival, showing me gesturing animatedly while other parents looked uncomfortable. Even a recording of my comments at Romano's, apparently captured by his cousin on her phone. There were witness statements too. Miriam describing her concerns about my behavior around Etta, Patricia recounting the dinner incident from her perspective. Even some of the parents from the school festival had provided written statements about what they'd observed. At the bottom of the pile was a folder labeled Financial Analysis. Graham had documented everything: our joint accounts, my spending patterns, the credit card charges from my lunches and shopping trips. He'd even tracked my work performance, noting the days I'd called in sick, usually hungover, and the decline in my client satisfaction ratings over the past 6 months. I felt like I was reading about a stranger, some unstable woman whose life was falling apart while she remained oblivious to the damage she was causing. But the woman in these documents was me, seen through the lens of someone who'd been watching and recording and building a case for months. My phone rang, startling me out of my stunned silence. Jules's name appeared on the screen. "Des? Mom said she couldn't reach you yesterday. She's worried about—" "Graham's divorcing me," I said, the words coming out flat and emotionless. Silence on the other end of the line. "Jules, did you hear me?" Yes, I heard you. When did this happen?" "This morning. He had the papers served." I laughed, but it sounded hysterical even to my own ears. "He's been planning this for months, Jules. Documenting everything, building a case like I'm some kind of criminal." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Fight it, I guess. Get my own lawyer. Try to make him see reason." But even as I said the words, I knew how futile they sounded. Graham didn't make impulsive decisions. If he'd filed for divorce, it was because he'd already considered every alternative and found them insufficient. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and spent hours poring over the documents, trying to find some weakness in Graham's case, some angle I could use to fight back. But the more I read, the more I realized how thoroughly he'd outmaneuvered me. He wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. He wasn't making wild accusations or demanding punitive measures. He was simply presenting a calm, documented case that I had become an unstable presence in our family's life, and that both he and Etta would be better served by a clean separation. When I tried calling him around 3 o'clock, it went straight to voicemail. His message was brief and professional. "You've reached Graham Morrell. Please leave a detailed message and I'll return your call as soon as possible." "Graham, it's me. We need to talk about this. You can't just blindside me with divorce papers and expect me not to fight back. Call me." He didn't call back. That evening, I drove to Miriam's house, determined to see my daughter and confront my husband. But when I rang the doorbell, it was Miriam who answered, her expression cool and unwelcoming. "Odessa, I was wondering when you'd show up. I want to see Etta, and I want to talk to Graham. Etta is doing her homework. Graham is helping her with a science project." Miriam stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "Perhaps it would be better if you called first next time." "She's my daughter, Miriam. I don't need to make an appointment to see my own child." "No, you don't. But you do need to consider what's best for her right now. She's confused and upset about the tension at home. Graham thought it might be good for her to have a few quiet days while you both figure out how to handle this situation." The reasonable tone of her voice made me want to scream. Everyone was being so calm, so rational, so concerned about doing the right thing. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning in the consequences of decisions I barely remembered making. "Can I at least talk to Graham?" Miriam studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Wait here." She disappeared inside, and I could hear muffled voices from somewhere in the house. After what felt like an eternity, Graham appeared on the porch, closing the door gently behind him. "Odessa. Don't Odessa me like I'm some stranger. I'm your wife, Graham. We've been married for 12 years. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for everything," he said quietly. "That's why this has been so difficult." "Then why are you doing it? Why are you throwing away our marriage over a few stupid comments?" Graham leaned against the porch railing, looking older than his 35 years. "It's not about the comments, Odessa. It's about what the comments revealed." "Which is what?" "That you don't respect me, that you don't value our marriage, that you're willing to humiliate me publicly to get attention from another man." His voice remained calm, but I could hear the pain underneath. "And that our daughter is starting to notice." The last part hit me like a physical blow. Etta doesn't understand. She understands more than you think. She asked me yesterday why Mommy says mean things about Daddy in front of other people. She wanted to know if it was her fault that we've been fighting. Tears stung my eyes. I never meant for her to be affected by this. But she has been affected, and that's when I realized that trying to save our marriage wasn't worth sacrificing our daughter's sense of security. I wanted to argue, to point out all the good times we'd had, all the reasons we should fight for our family. But standing there on his mother's porch, looking at the careful distance he maintained, even during this conversation, I realized that Graham had already moved past the point of salvaging what we'd had. "So that's it? You've made up your mind and there's nothing I can say to change it?" "I've made up my mind that Etta and I deserve better than what our home has become. Whether you want to be part of that better future is up to you." "What does that mean?" "It means the divorce is happening, Odessa. But how it happens, whether it's contentious or cooperative, whether it protects Etta or traumatizes her further, that's still a choice we can make together." He straightened up, preparing to go back inside. "The papers include contact information for a mediator. I'd recommend calling her if you want to discuss terms. But I won't be negotiating through emotional confrontations on my mother's porch." "Graham, wait!" But he was already disappearing through the door, leaving me standing alone in the gathering dusk, finally understanding that my quiet, methodical husband had just delivered the most decisive blow of our entire relationship. and he'd done it with the same calm precision he brought to everything else in his life. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Graham at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared family meals, helped Etta with homework, and planned vacations that now felt like another life. Between us lay the mediation agreement that would end our 12-year marriage. Jennifer Walsh, the mediator, spoke with calm professionalism. The custody arrangement is fair. Etta spends weekdays with Graham for school stability, weekends with you. Holidays alternate. Both parents retain joint decision-making on education and medical care. Graham would keep the house and mortgage to provide continuity for Etta. I'd receive my share of equity upon eventual sale, plus an equitable division of retirement accounts and savings. I stared at the papers, the clinical language reducing 12 years to visitation schedules and asset splits. "We could still try counseling," I said quietly. Graham's voice was gentle but final. "We've had that conversation for weeks, Odessa. The answer hasn't changed. Etta needs both parents. She'll have both, just in separate homes, without the tension she's already witnessed." He was right. My behavior, the office confrontations, the repeated calls to his mother, the desperate pleas to Shane, had only confirmed the pattern he'd documented. "I know I made mistakes," I whispered. "Intent and impact aren't the same," Graham replied. "I'm doing this to preserve what's left, for Etta and for us." Jennifer explained next steps. Court date next month, a formality since we'd agreed on terms. Graham had already signed, his signature precise as always. With shaking hands, I added mine to each page. When Jennifer left, I faced him alone. "I never meant for this." "I know," he said, "but I forgive you. That's why I kept this peaceful." Even now, he protected me from worse consequences, full custody battles, public humiliation, while safeguarding our daughter. That evening, after Graham took Etta for their first official week, I sat in the emptying house and traced how it unraveled. One cruel dinner joke, months of seeking validation from Shane, choices justified as honesty but rooted in selfishness. 6 months later, I watched from the school auditorium as Graham and Etta left her winter concert hand in hand. He'd remarried quietly, a colleague who looked at him with respect I'd forgotten to show. Etta thrived in their kind, stable home. Weekends with me were slowly rebuilding trust. Graham hadn't destroyed me. He'd refused disrespect, protected our daughter, and moved forward with dignity. His quiet strength, methodical, restrained, child first, had given me the hardest gift, the chance to see myself clearly and become someone worthy of love again. The divorce was final. The marriage was over. But the lesson, that small betrayals accumulate, that freedom from a valued life is the heaviest cost, was just beginning.